I remember the precise moment my faith in the Emperor began to die. Not instantly, mind you. Faith rarely vanishes in a single moment. Rather, it erodes like a cliff face battered by a relentless sea, until one day, the foundation simply gives way. My name is Jorvin Krah, once Commissar of the 117th Cadian Regiment. I say once, for that title holds no meaning here. Titles, ranks, honors, these are all constructs of civilization, and I am no longer in a civilized realm. The stench hits you first, always the stench. Blood and excrement and sweat all mingling into a miasma so thick it feels like drowning. The air itself becomes a weapon against your senses, an invisible toxin that never abates. The brain eventually adjusts. Of course, the human mind has remarkable adaptability even to the most grotesque conditions. This is both our greatest strength and most terrible weakness. I awoke in darkness, not complete darkness, mind you, but the sickly green glow of fungal light that passes for illumination in orcish domains. My head throbbed with pain, blood caking my scalp where the blow had landed. The operation had gone wrong, catastrophically so. What was supposed to be a simple raid against an isolated orc outpost had turned into an ambush. How they knew we were coming, I still do not know. Intelligence failure, perhaps, or treachery. In war, either is equally likely. The floor beneath me was metal, grating, rusted, and slick with substances I chose not to contemplate. Above a roof of corrugated metal sheets, haphazardly welded together, creating a cacophony of dripping sounds as condensation gathered and fell around me. The moans and whimpers of other prisoners, though I could not see them in the gloom. The chamber was vast. I could sense that much, with row upon row of cages stretching into shadows. "Commissar?" A voice, barely a whisper from somewhere to my right. "Commissar Krah, is that you?" I turned toward the sound, wincing as pain shot through my neck. A face emerged from the darkness, haggarded and bruised, but recognizable. Trooper Varen, one of my regiment's scouts. His left eye was swollen shut, dried blood tracking down his cheek like rust-colored tears. "Report, Trooper," I said automatically, my voice from thirst. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "Report?" "With respect, sir, there is nothing to report. The mission is lost. The platoon is dead. We are prisoners of the Greenkins." "How many survived?" I asked, ignoring his insubordination. In our current circumstances, protocol seemed a distant concern. From what I could tell, maybe 20 of us. The rest were killed in the ambush or executed after capture. The orcs seemed to find it amusing to make examples of the officers. You were spared because you were unconscious. They prefer their entertainment conscious entertainment. The word hung in the air like a curse. Even then, I did not truly understand what it meant to be entertainment for the orcs. That knowledge would come later, and with it, the first cracks in my faith. The sound of heavy footsteps interrupted our conversation, metal clanging against metal as something massive approached. Instinctively, we both retreated to the far corners of our respective cages. The footsteps stopped and a guttural laugh echoed through the chamber. "New meat awakens." A voice growled, thick with the crude accent of the Greenkins. A face appeared before my cage, green skin gleaming in the dim light, small red eyes glinting with cruel amusement. Not the biggest orc I had seen, but still massive compared to a human. Muscles bulging beneath scarred skin. Yumi whiffed a fancy hat. "You are special. The boss says you last longer than others." Maybe I remained silent, maintaining what dignity I could muster. The commander's handbook contains no chapter on proper conduct when captured by xenos. The standard doctrine is simple, if impractical. Fight to the death. Capture is not an option officially acknowledged, yet here I was very much captured. Very much alive. The orc grinned, revealing a row of jagged metal teeth. Silent type. That changes soon. All, talk in the end. Or screaming good, too. He laughed again, a sound like rocks in a metal drum. Food soon. You fight good, you eat good. You fight bad, you still eat, but maybe lose some bits first. With that cryptic statement, he moved on, checking other cages, occasionally prodding the occupants with a crude metal rod that sparked with electrical discharge when it made contact. The screams that followed each touch were a dreadful chorus. What did he mean? Fight for food, I asked Varun when the orc had moved beyond earshot. You will see soon enough, Commissar, he replied, his voice hollow with resignation. They do not simply feed us. That would be too civilized, too practical. Everything with the orcs is spectacle competition. They make games of our suffering. Before he could elaborate further, a deafening klaxon sounded, the noise reverberating painfully off the metal walls. The reaction from the prisoners was immediate and disturbing. Some curled into fetal positions, covering their ears and rocking back and forth. Others stood at attention, eyes wide with anticipation or terror. Varen simply closed his eyes and began muttering what sounded like a prayer. The far end of the chamber was suddenly illuminated as massive doors ground open, revealing a circular pit below. The floor around the pit was crowded with orcs of various sizes, all shouting and gesticulating wildly, betting, I would later learn, betting on us, on our lives, our pain, our degradation. One by one, cages were detached from their moorings and lowered toward the pit. Inside each, a prisoner. Some struggling frantically, others oddly calm, accepting their fate with a resignation that I would come to understand all too well. As each cage reached the bottom, it opened, depositing its occupant into the arena. In the center of the pit sat a mound of what appeared to be meat, rancid and crawling with maggots, but meat nonetheless. The game became immediately clear. Fight for food, fight other prisoners, fight for survival. I watched in horror as men who had once been comrades turned on each other with feral intensity. These were Imperial guardsmen trained to stand shoulder to shoulder against the enemies of mankind. Yet here they were reduced to animals, tearing at each other for scraps. And the orcs, how they roared their approval, throwing objects into the pit, sometimes aiming at specific prisoners, sometimes simply adding obstacles to the grim contest. The first time is the hardest, Varen said quietly beside me. You still remember who you were, what you stood for. The second time is easier. By the third, you stop thinking entirely. You become what they want you to become. How long have you been here? I asked, unable to tear my eyes from the spectacle below. 10 feedings, maybe 11. Time loses meaning. Some have been here longer. The ones who learn to entertain the greenkins. The ones who embrace what they have become. A particular struggle in the pit drew louder cheers from the orc audience. A large guardsman had another in a chokehold, slowly crushing his windpipe while simultaneously reaching for a piece of meat. The victim's eyes bulged, his face turning purple as he clawed desperately at his attacker's arms. That is Sergeant Hawk, Varun said, his voice devoid of emotion. He was known for his dedication to his men, once would give his ration to the wounded. Now look at him. The sergeant's victim went limp, and the orcs roared their approval. Pak released his hold and scrambled for the food, shoving it into his mouth without bothering to remove the maggots that writhed within. Tomorrow it could be us down there, Varun continued. If not tomorrow, then soon. They rotate the cages. Everyone gets their turn in the pit. I wanted to say something reassuring, something about maintaining faith in the Emperor, about the strength of the human spirit. The words that had always come so easily during battlefield addresses now stuck in my throat. What meaning did such platitudes have in this place? What relevance did the God Emperor have in this metal hell, where humanity itself was stripped away bite by bite? As if reading my thoughts, Varen spoke again. The Emperor cannot see us here, Commissar. This place exists outside his light. I should have reprimanded him for such heresy, should have reminded him of his duty, his faith. Instead, I remained silent, watching as below us Imperial guardsmen tore each other apart for rotting scraps while aliens laughed. Here's a tightened, darker rewrite of your passage. That night, I lay on the cold metal grating of my cage, the wounded around me moaning, and an orc guard's bellowing laugh slicing through the damp air. I tried to pray, but the words of the Imperial Creed, drilled into me since childhood, evaporated like breath in frost. In their place, one thought kept returning. What will I be when they lower my cage into that pit? What will remain of Commissar Yan Cray when hunger and the blunt animal need to survive take hold? Sleep did not come. It was a luxury from another life. I existed instead in a stubborn, weary wakefulness, every sense keyed to the slightest sound or shift. The first ugly edges of survival were already rising, the human animal beneath the veneer of civilization stirring. A green fungal light washed the chamber in perpetual twilight, never bright enough to be kind. In that half-light I took stock. My prison measured roughly 3 by 2 meters, its height forcing a slight stoop. The bars were a careless collage of metal, some salvaged from Imperial vehicles, others of unknown provenance, crudely welded the orcish way, ugly but solid. They had stripped me of my jacket, my bolt pistol, my power sword. Symbolic items, too. The commissar's cap, the red sash, had been taken as trophies. I still wore black trousers and boots, though the hidden blade compartments of the latter had been emptied. My ID tags hung at my throat. The Imperial Aquila pressed cold against my chest, a small, stubborn reminder of a world that felt very far away. Across from me, Varen slept in fits, breath steady, punctuated by soft whimpers. An empty cage to my left suggested another victim taken to the feeding pit. To my right, a figure sat motionless, facing away. At the sound of my attention, he turned. An old man, his face a map of scars and furrows, a white beard matted with grime and dried blood. Yet his eyes were unnervingly bright, blue and clear as chips of ice. "The Commissar awakens," he said, voice stronger than his years promised. "I wondered when you'd join our little community." "You know who I am?" I asked. A wheeze that could have been laughter. "Everyone knows the Commissar, the man who shoots cowards, the face of Imperial justice. Tell me, Commissar, where is your justice now?" There was no answer I could give. He introduced himself. "Thorn, once a medic in the 44th Valhallan, before your time, I expect." He shrugged. "I've been in this charming establishment 3 standard months." 3 months. The number landed like a blow. "How have you survived?" I managed. "By being useful." He spoke plainly. "The orcs have a crude medical sense. Amputations, cauterizations. But sometimes they need something more delicate. Keeping a prisoner alive through torture, that ass where a medic ass hands come in." My voice tightened with disgust. He laughed again, thin and weary. "Judge me not, Commissar. We are all compromised here. Soon enough you will be too. But I do not aid in the torment itself. I patch the victims after the orcs tire. I prolong their lives, sometimes long enough for what you might call a merciful end." The implication hung between us. Euthanasia disguised as care. Another heresy added to the list of atrocities that had redefined law into something almost like compassion. "There'll be another feeding tomorrow," Thorn said, shifting the conversation. "Your cage is in the rotation. Be ready." I swallowed my pride and asked the question that mattered most. "What advice would you give?" Thorn considered me, eyes flicking to the bars and back. "Rank means nothing here. Survival supersedes it. You are strong for an officer, and your training gives you advantage, but strength alone won at save you. The orcs don't only care who wins their games, they care who entertains them. Sometimes a good loss is worth more than a victory." His words were not comfort. They were instruction in a new bitter calculus, one that would teach a commissar how to live by doing things the Empire would burn him for. "You suggest I lose deliberately?" I snapped. He shrugged, as if the idea were a simple fact. I suggest you understand the true nature of your predicament. You are not a prisoner of war, Commissar. You are a performer in a theater of cruelty. Learn the role that keeps you alive the longest. With that cryptic counsel, he turned away. The conversation apparently was over. I sat with the echo of his words. A performer in a theater of cruelty. The thought was an affront to everything my training had taught me. Commissars did not perform. We commanded, we punished, we embodied the Emperor's unbending will. The Emperor was not here. In his stead were green-skinned brutes, their humor crude, and their entertainments crueler still. A slow understanding crawled through me. Survival here would demand a flexibility my iron training had never allowed. If mourning had any meaning in this timeless pit, it arrived with the return of the orc guards, brutish shapes prodding the prisoners awake with crackling shock rods, lingering to torment whoever made the most amusing noises. I sat rigid in my cage, determined to show no fear. The orc who stopped before me was new, bigger than the last, a crude mechanical eye set in his skull. He peered with hungry curiosity. "Commissar, man," he growled. "You fight today. Boss says make it a good show or you end up squig food." He leaned close, the metal eye whirring. "You win. Maybe extra food later. You lose." Fingers one by one. He moved on, leaving his threat to thud against my ribs like a physical blow. Thorn stirred beside me. "An honor," he said dryly. "Grim Toph himself has taken an interest. One of the boss's lieutenants. His favor's useful and dangerous." The warning barely left my mouth before the familiar klaxon bellowed. The feeding ritual had begun. Around us, prisoners reacted with the same mix of terror and hollow acceptance I had watched the day before. Veron was awake, jaw set. "Your turn today, Commissar," he said. "Remember, they want a show. Give it to them, and you might live." "And sacrifice my dignity in the process?" I bit back. Veron's smile was small and sad. "Dignity? Look around. There is no dignity here, only survival." The cage lurched. For a heartbeat, everything in me went weightless as we dropped toward the pit. The world narrowed to a raw, stomach-clenching fall. Other cages moved in concert, the air filling with the sound of cheering, jeering, and the rough music of crude weapons. The stench came next. Orc sweat, fungus rot, machine oil, a rank bouquet that cut through the prison's general reek. We landed with a jarring impact. 3 other cages touched down across the floor. In one sat Corporal Deshawn, heavy weapons specialist from 3rd Platoon. The others were strangers, their Imperial uniforms torn and filthy, nevertheless comrades by the fate that bound us. A huge orc stepped forward, flesh-mapped scars and crude tattoos crawling across his arms. A necklace of human fingers clacked against his chest as he leaned toward the pit's edge, tusked mouth split in a permanent leer. "Today's special," he bellowed, voice riding the crowd. "We got Commissar Man, Big Boss Umir who shoot his own boys. Now we see if he fight good or just good at kill scared." The pit answered in a roar that was almost a physical thing. A rush of hatred surged through me, a brief, fierce brightness that overrode my fear. If I walked out of this, I swore that orc would not live to brag. With a grinding clank, the cage doors swung open. For a heartbeat, none of us moved. We measured each other, the arena, the odds. Then the theater began, and whatever remained of my discipline narrowed to one single imperative: survive. In the center lay the meat, the same grisly offering as before, this time flanked by a few dented containers that might once have held water. The orc leader mocked our hesitation. "What you waiting for? Fight or no food? Maybe no fingers either," he barked, making a cutting motion across his throat that needed no translation. Corporal Deshawn moved first, surprising speed in a man hollowed by imprisonment. He sprinted for the pile. 1 stranger followed. The 3rd stayed pressed to the pit wall, backing away from conflict. I stepped carefully from my cage and took in the arena. The pit measured roughly 15 meters across. Its floor was hard-packed earth, streaked and crusted with what looked disturbingly like old blood. 5 meters of wall rose to the galleries where the orcs leaned and jeered, low enough to see, high enough to trap. Scattered across the floor were implements chosen for spectacle: a length of chain, a splintered plank, a jagged shard of metal, tools intended to turn desperation into theater. Deshan and the other attacker tangled over the food, awkward and brutal, each man clawing for a share. Above, the orcs howled and jeered. The third prisoner, seeing the commotion, edged toward the metal shard. He moved like a strategist, sizing an opportunity, the most dangerous type of opponent. In that moment, they were not comrades, but contenders. The old rules of brotherhood had vanished into the mud. To eat was to fight. To survive might mean killing men I would once have led. The reality hit with the force of a blow. The crowd's attention slid to me. My inaction had become its own provocation. The orc leader pointed and shouted something that melted into the cacophony. Do something or be made to. I closed the distance to the struggle, not yet committing to a plan, only to participation. Dacian gained the upper hand and drove an elbow into his rival's temple, sending him sprawling. Meat clenched in his fist, he turned, panting. "Face me," he rasped. "Stay back, Commissar. I respect rank, but I'll fight for this." "I do not want to fight you, Corporal," I said, keeping my hands open and visible. "We can share. Maintain some semblance of cohesion." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Unit cohesion," he spat. "Look around. There's no unit here, only hunger and entertainment." He jerked his chin toward the galleries. The orcs had come for spectacle. For a heartbeat, his military mind wrestled with mine. I thought the argument might reach him. That duty even here could bind us. Then the shard went in. The third prisoner had circled while we spoke, driven by calculation. He twisted the blade, tore it free. Blood sprayed. Dacian crumpled, meat rolling from numb fingers. The pit erupted in a frenzy. At last, the audience had what it wanted. Training took over before thought did. The attacker lunged at me. I sidestepped, seized his wrist, and used his momentum to fling him past. A strike to the back of the knee dropped him. The metal shard clattered from his hand. I kicked it clear and drove a knee into his spine, pinning him to the packed earth. "Yield," I commanded, my voice cold and practiced. The Commissar's authority returning like a reflex, even if the law it represented no longer held here. "Yeah," I commanded, the authority in my voice automatic, a product of years of conditioning. He laughed, a desperate, broken sound. "Yeah. This is not a dueling ground, Commissa. This is a death pit. There is no yielding here." The truth of his words hit me like a physical blow. This was not combat as I understood it with its rules and protocols. This was survival in its most primal form. And in that moment, a strange clarity descended upon me. If I was to survive, truly survive, and not just extend my suffering, I needed to understand the nature of this new battlefield. I released my hold and stood, backing away from the fallen man. He looked at me in confusion, clearly expecting a finishing blow. The orcs above had gone oddly quiet, perhaps equally confused by my actions. "I will not kill for their amusement," I declared loudly enough for the closest orcs to hear. I turned in a slow circle, making eye contact with as many of the xenos as possible. "I am Commissar Kryl of the Imperial Guard. I am not your plaything." The silence stretched for a long moment and then broke with a wave of jeering laughter. Objects began to rain down into the pit. Bits of garbage, small rocks, even what appeared to be severed human fingers. The message was clear enough. Fight or become the target. The man I had spared was on his feet now, eyeing me wearily. Desson lay motionless where he had fallen. Whether dead or merely unconscious, I could not tell. The fourth prisoner, who had lost the initial grapple for food, had retreated to a corner of the pit, nursing what appeared to be a broken arm. I stood my ground as the bombardment continued, refusing to provide the violence the orcs craved. It was a small defiance, likely futile, but in that moment it felt vitally important. Some fragment of my identity as a commissar, as a human being, demanded this stand. The large orc leader bellowed something, and the rain of objects ceased. He pointed at me, then made a throat-cutting gesture. Two smaller orcs immediately detached from the crowd, vaulting down into the pit with surprising agility. Each carried a crude but effective-looking blade, and their intentions were unmistakable. They approached cautiously, spreading out to come at me from different angles. I turned slowly, keeping them both in view, aware that my chances against two armed orcs were virtually non-existent. Still, I would not die cowering. I took up a defensive stance, hands raised, feet planted firmly. "Come then," I said quietly. "Let us finish this." The orcs charged simultaneously, faster than their bulk would suggest possible. I dodged the first, using his momentum against him, as I had with the human attacker. But the second caught me with a glancing blow across the ribs. Pain flared, hot and immediate, but the wound was not deep. I spun away, creating distance, reassessing. The crowd was fully engaged now, shouting what I assumed were encouragements to their fellows in the pit. The orc I had dodged rounded on me again, blade slashing in wild arcs. I retreated before the onslaught, looking desperately for some advantage, some weapon or strategy. My back hit the wall of the pit. No further retreat possible. The orcs closed in, confident now, enjoying the hunt. I tensed, prepared to launch myself in one final hopeless attack. And then the most unexpected thing happened. The metal shard that had killed Dason embedded itself in the eye of the nearest orc. The creature bellowed in pain, dropping its blade and clutching at the wound. The second orc turned in confusion, only to receive a length of chain whipped across its face. My rescuer was the fourth prisoner, the one with the apparently broken arm. The arm, it seemed, was very much functional, a ruse perhaps, or simply not as damaged as it had appeared. He wielded the chain with practiced skill, keeping the remaining orc at bay while backing toward me. "Commissar," he said without taking his eyes off his opponent, "I believe a strategic withdrawal is in order." I scooped up the blade dropped by the wounded orc, agreed. "Though our options appear limited, there is always an option," he replied cryptically, then raising his voice to be heard by the spectators. "Is this the best you can offer? 2 runs against Imperial soldiers. Where is the sport in that?" The tactic was immediately clear. The only difference is how long the journey takes, and how much of yourself you lose along the way. Thorne's words lingered like a sentence passed, and I felt the weight of them in my chest. How much had I already surrendered? Small compromises, subtle shifts in thought. The commissar I once was would never have accepted the touch of a xenos medic, never tolerated even the pretense of cooperation with an enemy. Yet here I was, calculating, adapting, making plans to survive another day in this rusting cage of horrors. "Rest," Thorne advised from the shadows of his neighboring cell. "The body heals, but the mind will need strength more. The arena will take everything." I said nothing, only stretched out on the mesh flooring that served as both bed and punishment. Sleep was no mercy here, jagged with pain, broken by the moans of the wounded and the guttural laughter of guards echoing through the dark. But exhaustion claimed me eventually, pulling me down into a fevered dream. I was back at the Schola Progenium, the place where I had been forged into a commissar. Drills without end, sermons on vigilance, the litany of discipline pounded into us daily. In the dream, I stood before cadets, lecturing on how to hold morale against the horrors of the alien. But even as I spoke, my uniform shredded into rags, falling away thread by thread. The cadets' faces twisted, jaws elongating, eyes filling with brutish glee until a mob of orcs jeered back at me, mocking my nakedness, reveling in my weakness. I woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat despite the choking heat of the prison. Around me, the others stirred in silence, each locked in their own private nightmare. My hand went to my side, fingers brushing the rough, clumsy stitches beneath my tunic. At least the pain was honest, something I could still endure. The cycle of this place resumed, guards shoving, prisoners dragged screaming to the feeding pit, the air alive with the sounds of violence. I remained untouched in my cage, spared for now, marked as an arena fighter. A reprieve, though temporary. Around what I judged to be midday, a new figure appeared. Larger than the usual guards, his armor crusted with human teeth and finger bones, he moved with the arrogance of command. "Commissar man," he growled, voice like grinding stone. "Boss wants talk. You behave. Maybe keep fingers today." The cage door groaned open, and I was hauled once more through the maze of passageways. This time we climbed upward, leaving behind the slapdash warrens of the prison. The walls grew thicker, sturdier, not orcish junkwork, but original imperial ferrocrete and steel. This place had been something once, before it was defiled. At last we entered a chamber that had clearly been a command center. Faded Aquilas clung stubbornly to the walls, most marred by crude glyphs and splashes of paint. At the center stood what had once been a tactical display table, now transformed into a grotesque throne heaped with trophies, bones, skulls, shattered helms of the fallen. And upon it sat the largest orc I had ever seen, War Boss. The classification surfaced unbidden from my training, my mind identifying him before my heart dared accept it. This was no raider chief, no bandit king. This was a warlord, a commander of armies, a brute who bent entire sectors beneath his will. His hide was darker than his kin's, near black in places, latticed with scars from countless battles. One eye was gone, replaced by a red-glowing augmetic. His massive bulk was reinforced with crude machinery, pistons and plating grafted to flesh, and on his right arm, a power claw crackled with restrained fury, humming like a caged beast eager to rend. Do you want me to push this closer to horror, leaning into the sensory dread and the overwhelming scale of the war boss, or keep it more tactical and military like the observations of a commissar assessing an enemy commander? War boss, Grisgut rumbled, his voice shockingly clear for an orc. So, this the commissar who won't fight proper, the Hume who thinks he's too good for Grisgut's games. I forced myself upright, ignoring the sting in my side, and met his glowing bionic eye without blinking. I am Commissar Yorvin Kryl, servant of the God Emperor of mankind. I do not perform for the amusement of xenos. The war boss's laughter rolled through the chamber, a grinding thunder that shook the trophies on his throne. All Humes perform, Commissar man. Some just take longer to learn their part. He leaned forward, the throne creaking beneath his bulk. You fought in the pit, fought well, but didn't kill when the kill was easy. Why? The question caught me off guard. I had expected mockery, threats, perhaps torture, not something that sounded almost like curiosity. I will not kill my own kind for your entertainment, I answered, steadying my breath. That is not war. It is not even sport. It is cruelty. Cruelty? Grisgut tilted his head, genuinely perplexed. No, fighting is proving, showing who's strongest. That is the Orky way. It is not my way. He studied me in silence, heavy gaze weighing my words. Then, with a gesture, he barked an order. A guard scurried out and returned, dragging a ragged prisoner. My chest tightened. Sergeant Hawk. The same guardsman I had seen butcher his comrade for scraps in the feeding pit. He looked broken now, eyes darting, skin pale and stretched over bone. This one kill other Humes for food, Grisgut said with disdain, tossing a hand at Hawk. Kill weak way, no honor. You don't kill at all. So, Commissar man, which better, the one who kills without honor, or the one who lets others die 'cause he too proud to get dirty? The words pierced deeper than I wanted to admit. How many guardsmen had I executed for cowardice? How many necks broken? How many last shots fired in the name of discipline? Was that truly different from what Hawk had done, killing to survive in a nightmare without law or hope? "There is no honor here," I said at last, voice steady but low. "No glory, no purpose, only survival and spectacle. I will survive without becoming an actor in your theater of cruelty." Grisgut leaned back, the sound he made like metal tearing against stone. His laughter again. Big words from Humie in cage. Grizz got curious now. Wants to see how long Commissar pride lasts. Tomorrow you fight. Not other Humies. Something special. Something worthy of a Commissar. His gesture was final. Guards seized me, dragging me back toward the door. Behind us, Grisgut barked another order. A single scream cut through the chamber, high, terrified, abruptly ended. I did not turn back. I knew what had become of Sergeant Hawk. The march back to my cage was silent, but my mind roared with questions. What special trial awaited me in the arena? What horror had Grisgut chosen to test me against? When I was shoved back inside, Thorn and Varun looked up sharply, questions in their eyes. I gave them the account, brief and clinical, ending with Hawk's fate. "The arena," Varun whispered, fear edging his voice. "And against something special." He lowered his head. "Emperor protect you, Commissar." "The Emperor seems absent here," I muttered, bitterness slipping into my tone before I could restrain it. "I will have to rely on what is closer at hand." Thorn nodded once, a hard glint in his eyes. "Pragmatism, the first step to survival. So, what resources do you have? Count them. Physical, mental, spiritual, leave nothing out." I took his counsel, running the inventory in my mind. Physically, stronger than most prisoners, my conditioning intact despite the wound. Painful, yes, but not fatal. Mentally, the training of the Schola Progenium, tactics and willpower honed to steel. Spiritually, I faltered. Once my faith had burned bright, a weapon as sharp as any blade. Now it flickered, a candle struggling in a draft, not extinguished, but guttering. Do you want me to carry this thread into a moment of internal crisis of faith, showing the Commissar wrestling with the erosion of his belief? Or keep it more iron-willed, emphasizing defiance despite the cracks? The words of the Imperial Creed no longer came unbidden. In their place grew doubt, a gnawing suspicion that the universe was colder, emptier than the ecclesiarchy ever dared admit. "You falter at the spiritual," Thorn observed, his gaze uncomfortably sharp. "I've seen it before. Many who endure this place find their faith withering. Even the devout wonder why their God abandons them to such misery." "The Emperor tests us all," Varen interjected quickly, though the hollowness in his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. "Our faith is proven through tribulation." "A pleasant thought," Thorn replied, not unkindly. "But consider, if suffering is the Emperor's chosen test, how do his methods differ from those of the ruinous powers? They too claim pain as the path to strength." The words skirted heresy. Once, I would have executed a guardsman for less. Yet now, instead of fury, they roused unease. What lesson could possibly be drawn from this? What higher purpose was served by being paraded for the sport of xenos? I was spared from answering by the arrival of food. If the thin, unidentifiable sludge shoved through the bars deserved such a name. Still, I ate. Strength was a resource I could not afford to waste, not with the arena looming. That night, sleep eluded me. I turned to meditation as taught in the Schola, emptying the mind, preparing for battle. I ran through scenarios, imagined opponents, weighed strategies. Yet ignorance gnawed at the exercise. How could one prepare for the unknown? Morning came with noise and motion. The greenskins were restless, excited. Today would be a spectacle, a commissar in the arena, violence and novelty both. I was a gift to their crude appetites. 4 guards came for me this time, where 2 had once sufficed. Whether out of respect or caution, I could not say. My wrists were bound before they opened the cage. "Good fortune, Commissar," Veroun called as I was led away. The traditional imperial farewell. We both knew fortune had no place here. The arena, when I saw it at last, was both grander and smaller than I had imagined. A gutted hangar bay, its roof torn open to a sky choked with fumes. The floor was spread with sand, already stained with the blood of many species. Tiered stands circled the pit, filling with orcs of every size, from squabbling runts to hulking knobs, whose bulk nearly rivaled their war boss. They led me below the stands to a holding area. Cages lined the walls, their occupants a menagerie of misery. Humans, mostly, veterans of the pits awaiting their turn to die for spectacle. But there were others. A snarling, Kroot warrior, a twisted husk that might once have been Eldar, even a juvenile tyrannid restrained by means I could not comprehend. In a preparation alcove, they unbound my wrists. To my surprise, my commissar's jacket and cap lay waiting. The garments had been crudely repaired, the jacket missing a sleeve, the cap crusted with blood not my own. Still, they were symbols, identity, authority. I donned them without hesitation. "Look proper now," one of the guards remarked, almost approving. "Good fight better when fighter looks the part." Against one wall stood a rack of weapons, laser guns, blades, and bayonets, all scavenged from some battlefield long past. I was ordered to take one. My hand hovered over a las gun briefly before moving on. In close quarters, combat, a bayonet would serve better than a ranged weapon with limited ammunition. I selected a combat knife, testing its edge and weight, serviceable, if not ideal. A klaxon sounded, and the crowd noise above increased dramatically. The guard gestured toward a ramp leading up to the arena floor. "Go," he said simply. "Fight good. Die good. Either way, make a good show." I ascended the ramp with measured steps, forcing myself to move deliberately rather than rushing or hesitating. The noise hit me like a physical force as I emerged into the open arena. A wall of sound composed of shouts, jeers, and the clashing of weapons against armor or shields. The crowd, seeing my commissar's uniform, reached new heights of excitement. In the center of the arena stood the war boss Grisguts, his massive form even more imposing in the open space. He raised his power claw for silence, and remarkably the crowd obeyed, the noise dropping to a low murmur of anticipation. "Today!" Grisguts bellowed, his voice carrying effortlessly to the furthest reaches of the stands. "We had a special fight! Imperial Commissar Man, big boss who shoots coward ooies against something from nightmares, something that eats worlds and never stops." A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Surely he could not mean. A gate at the far end of the arena ground opened and my worst fears were confirmed. The creature that emerged was unmistakable despite its relatively small size. A tyrannid warrior, its chitinous armor gleaming dully in the sunlight, its multiple limbs ending in wicked talons, its eyeless head swiveling as it scented the air and sensed me. The crowd erupted in excited shouts as the creature oriented toward me, its posture shifting from cautious to predatory in an instant. I raised my knife, knowing full well how hopelessly outmatched I was. A commissar against a tyrannid warrior was not a duel. It was an execution. Grisguts retreated to Adelms, a protected observation platform, his booming laugh audible even over the crowd noise. "Fight! Start now," he declared. "No end until one dead." The tyrannid charged, covering the distance between us with frightening speed. I dodged its initial rush, rolling across the sand and coming up in a defensive crouch. The creature recovered quickly, more quickly than something its size should have been able to. Pivoting to face me again, I circled wearily, knife held low and ready, searching for weaknesses. The tyrannid's carapace appeared damaged in several places, likely from previous arena fights or perhaps its original capture. One limb moved slightly out of sync with the others, suggesting an injury not fully healed. Vulnerabilities, but how to exploit them with only a combat knife. The creature charged again, But this time I stood my ground, waiting until the last possible moment before sidestepping. As it passed, I slashed at the damaged limb, feeling the knife connect with something softer than carapace. I sprayed across the sand, and the tyrannid screeched, a sound that vibrated painfully in my skull. The crowd roared its approval, and I was reminded that this was not merely combat for survival. It was performance. The longer I lasted, the more entertainment I provided, the more value I had to my captors. It was a sickening calculus, but one I could potentially use to my advantage. The tyrannid circled more cautiously now, wary of my blade. I used the moment's reprieve to scan the arena more thoroughly, looking for anything that might serve as an additional weapon or tactical advantage. The sand was littered with debris from previous contests, bones, both human and xenos, fragments of armor, the occasional glint of metal. The creature lunged again, this time feinting to draw my dodge before changing direction. I anticipated the maneuver, having fought similar opponents during my service, though never so directly or with such poor equipment. I parried a talon with my knife, the impact numbing my arm to the shoulder, and delivered a kick to the tyrannid's injured limb. It staggered momentarily, and I pressed the advantage, slashing at its face, aiming for the sensory organs I knew existed beneath the armored carapace. The blade bit deep, scoring another line of alien flesh and drawing a fresh spray of ichor. The tyrannid hissed, a sound like steam escaping a ruptured boiler, and lashed out with its tail. The blow swept my legs out from under me, pitching me into the sand. I rolled instantly, instincts overriding pain, and the talon meant to gut me buried itself where my chest had been a heartbeat before. I slashed again as I moved, opening another wound that pulsed and oozed, forcing the creature to recoil. Space, a breath no more, enough to stagger back to my feet. The arena roared. The orcs were on their feet, teeth clacking, exchanging wagers with manic glee. My survival had become a spectacle, a currency. In another life, the thought might have been amusing. The battle blurred into a rhythm. Strike and counter, advance and retreat, blood and sand. Minutes felt like hours. The tyrannid was faster, stronger, its body a weapon sculpted by alien evolution. I had only intelligence, training, and the bitter experience of fighting its kind. I knew their habits, their angles of attack, their small but exploitable weaknesses. Yet attrition favored it. Even diminished by captivity, its flesh knitted faster than mine. Every exchange left me slower, heavier. It did not tire. A misstep, a fraction of a second too slow, and a talon carved my arm from shoulder to elbow. Pain flared white-hot, staggering me. The crowd's roar reached a fever pitch at the sight of human blood. The tyrannid scented weakness. I fell back, step after step, until my spine struck a support pillar at the arena's edge. No further retreat. The creature advanced, deliberate now, savoring the inevitable. I tightened my grip on the knife, jaw set. If this was my end, I would sell my life dearly. Then I saw it, a half-buried shape glinting in the sand at my feet. A frag grenade, dropped by some earlier fighter, or planted as an amusement by the orcs. Either way, it was salvation. I lunged as the tyrannid charged. My fingers closed around the cold metal sphere just as claws raked across my back, tearing through cloth and flesh alike. I rolled with the blow, rising to a crouch, grenade slick with my blood. The beast wheeled, preparing to finish me. Timing would be everything. Too soon it would evade. Too late, I would never rise again. It leapt, a perfect predatory arc. I primed the grenade, ducked low, and as its body passed overhead, I drove the explosive into a gaping wound where its carapace had been shattered. The blast came almost instantly. The tyrannid's bulk absorbed much of it, but the shock wave still hurled me across the sand. My ears rang. My vision swam. Through the haze, I saw it convulsing, limbs spasming as ichor poured from its ruptured form. For a moment, silence. Even the orcs seemed stunned. Then comprehension spread. A human, armed with nothing but a knife, had slain a tyrannid warrior in single combat. The sound that followed was unlike anything I had heard from them before. Not mere approval or bloodlust, something closer to reverence. The improbable victory had struck a chord deep within their brutal minds. I forced myself upright, swaying under the weight of exhaustion and blood loss. My uniform hung in tatters, more red than black, but I stood, knife still in my hand. Eyes fixed on the war boss's observation platform, I faced him with what dignity I could muster.